Shabbat Shalom. I'm Rabbi Robert Barr, and I'm pleased that you're joining me and one another for this streaming Shabbat service. This is a chance for us to pause, to catch a breath, to think about where we've been, and to think about where we are going. For the days flow into one another without interruption. Time races on. The Sabbath is our means to divert time, a stepping off point, pausing with friends and loved ones to observe, then rejoice in the wonder-filled coincidence of living. There can be a sense of pleasure in every given breath, blessed with taste to savor and warmth to give and to receive. Bestowed with gifts of sight and sound, we are obliged to cherish and revel in each smile and every musical note. The Sabbath also awakens us to the silence between notes. It speaks of contemplation, the quiet delight of literature, of unhurried walks, of rare conversations. The Sabbath can be our interlude, our ritual pause in this lively current, our signal to step more lightly, to appreciate more profoundly, to dive more deeply into the questions that life is asking. Again, I'm Rabbi Robert Barr of Congregation Beth Adam. That's our bricks and mortar congregation here in Greater Cincinnati and our Jewish community, which is our online initiative, which we began over 13 years ago. We began streaming services online when people thought that there wasn't a reason to do that at all. They didn't see the value. We picked up that there was something special about using the internet, allowing us to remain connected with members who moved to different cities, students who grew up here but may have moved, and people who may have encountered Beth Adam, maybe reading an article about us or maybe doing a search. And so the internet afforded us that opportunity. Of course, it became so much more important during the pandemic. And now, even though the pandemic has subsided and we're having services in person once again in religious school, we recognize as a community that using the internet, that this tool allows us to remain connected with so many people. And it's a great opportunity, but it's a tool. It isn't the point. The point is the philosophy that we give expression to here at Congregation Beth Adam. For over 40 years, we've given expression to a bold, dynamic Judaism, a Judaism that reflects who we are. We're not just mimicking our ancestors, the words they wrote or the ideas they crafted or the rituals that spoke to them. We recognize we're not like our ancestors and that we needed to create a Judaism and a Jewish expression that reflects who we are, what we believe, the information that we have access to, which they never had. That's what we're doing here. That's why our liturgy is different than most congregations you'll encounter. Our liturgy speaks about human responsibility, that we have to make the decisions to make our planet better. It won't happen magically. No divine hand is going to rescue us from what we are doing. It is incumbent upon us to do it ourselves. So I'm so glad you're joining me and one another for the service. Being online affords us certain opportunities. It means we can do some time shifting. You don't have to watch the service when it's posted at 7 o'clock. Many people do, but other people choose to watch it later when it's more convenient for them, when their own schedule allows. That is part of being a modern person. We don't have to live the schedule our ancestors lived. It also means that I could record a service with an individual like I did for this service. I'll talk about it a little bit later on, and bring it into the service because it was convenient for the person to speak to me at a different time, not during this service. And it also means you can chat. Some of you are probably on bethadam.org, and that's a group that likes to talk to one another during services. I hope you pause during our conversation to listen, or you can come back and watch it again. But we always encourage you to be welcoming to everybody who comes on, whether you've been a long-time participant or you're participating for the first time. Please let us know where you are participating from. It's always nice to know how our congregation reaches beyond the walls of our sanctuary for Friday night services. So I'm glad you're here. We're going to continue our service with the lighting of the candles. The candles of Shabbat stand before us, waiting to meet the flame, longing to share their warmth, ready to shed their light. Like those who came before us, like all people, we find comfort in fear and flame, endless swirl of fascination, mystery and awe. Like those who came before us, like all people, we are graced with the desire and the will to understand. So we continue our ancestors' search for answers, pushing away the darkness of ignorance. The flames they saw as magic and beyond comprehension became flames of knowledge and hope. But still, we look with wonder, inspired by their beauty and their power. We embrace the flames of Shabbat. We embrace the light, our vessel of mystery and understanding. As we light our Shabbat candle, we celebrate our journey, our quest, and our moments of peace. May the light of our people shine. May the light of Shabbat cast its warmth in our homes. May these candles burn with respect for all who push beyond the bonds of ignorance, for all who seek justice, for all who build community. May these candles burn with memory of all who came before us. And may we draw on the many ways our people have given voice to their ideas and their values. May we add our own insight to their glow. Baruch ha'or ba'olam, blessed is the light within the world. Baruch ha'or ba'adam, blessed is the light within each person. Baruch ha'or ba'Shabbat, blessed is the light of the Sabbath. May I discover the ability to feel the pain of others, work for others, among others, and there come to feel a part of that to which I belong. May I discover the ability to be alone, so that I can go out of doors each day among the flowers, trees, among the birds, and all that live, beneath the sky of stars and planets, and there come to feel a part of that to which I belong. May I discover the ability to sit in silence, so that I may hear not the voices of others, but my own voice, the beat of my heart, the sound of my breath, the utterance of my soul, and here come to feel a part of that to which I belong. As I said, I was able to record a conversation earlier and then bring it into the service. I recorded a conversation with Rabbi Rami Shapiro. Some of you have heard Rabbi Shapiro before. In fact, I already streamed 2 different services with him about his book, Judaism Without Tribalism. And I imposed upon him for a 3rd conversation. The 3rd conversation is the one we're going to stream tonight. It is about Jesus. Rabbi Shapiro writes about a Jewish approach to Jesus. And I hope you find our conversation as interesting as I had having it with him.
So I am delighted that Rabbi Rami Shapiro is still willing to have a conversation with me. Those of you who know, I've already had 2 conversations with Rabbi Shapiro. We did do them sequentially, but we're going to watch them over a period of weeks on our Shabbat service. He wrote a book called Judaism Without Tribalism. I encourage you to pick the book up, and more than pick the book up, I encourage you to read the book and explore it, how he challenges the Jewish community to rethink itself. Now, what I want to explore with you today is you have a chapter in here about Jesus. And for a lot of Jews, it's one of those things that we don't really know how to talk about. You know, Jesus, he's a famous Jewish guy, but is he still our guy? Is he their guy? How do we do that? Was he a prophet? So Rabbi Shapiro, what compelled you to write about Jesus? That's the first question. And the second one is then, what did you say about Jesus?
So to me, it's an issue of cultural appropriation.
Well, okay.
He was our guy. You know, you like him. You didn't like him. He was a radical reformer of the Judaism of his time. And he took the Judaism of his time and he, reformed it in his own image. And, when the rabbis asked Jesus in the New Testament, what's the most important commandment? When Hillel is asked that by the Roman, in a sense, Hillel makes up something. He makes up what's called the golden rule. If it's hateful to you, don't do it to anybody else. Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus quotes Torah. And he says, he quotes the V'ahavta. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your might, with all your soul. And he says, that's the whole of the Torah and the prophets. But then he says, but there's one more thing that's really close to being as important. And he quotes Leviticus 19:18, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. That That's it. That's his Judaism. Love God, love your neighbor. And then he expounds on that. What happens when he's dead is that, and the early Christian writers are Jews, but
Right.
they're now writing for a different audience. They're now writing, I mean, Jesus didn't write anything. We don't even know if anything he says in the New Testament actually is said by him.
Right.
He could simply be an appropriated character for these other authors. But they're writing for a different community. Some are writing for Jews who are looking for a more spiritual Judaism, less legalistic, if you like. But some they're not Jews anymore, that they're trying to bring this teaching about now what they call the Messiah, they call God incarnate, basically,
right,
to non-Jews. So
and when we say non-Jews, we're not talking about Christians. There were no Christians.
There weren't any Christians.
No, who was this body of people they were writing to? What did they believe? What was their sort of cultural or
I think they're talking to two groups, maybe. Some people, Paul preached in synagogues, so he's talking to Jews, but there also this group called the God-fearers. These are people who want to be Jewish, but want to keep their penis intact. So
real practical, practical thought thinking.
Yeah. Hey, I really like your religion, but no way am I doing that. So they were, Jewish hangers-on kind of thing. And they were talking to them. And that's why a lot of what you read in Paul is you don't have to be a Jew to love Jesus. Like, what was it? Levy's bread? You don't have to be Jewish.
To like Levy's bread. That was a whole campaign in New York. Sure. Yeah.
It's the same thing. You don't have to be Jewish to love Jesus. And in fact, don't even bother being Jewish because actually Jews suck and we're going to create something better. So that's usually, that's the Christ. Christ is a problem for Jews, I would think. Christ is a problem for me. Jesus is my cousin. He's a Jew. I'm a Jew.
And Christ wasn't his last name. What was Christ referred to? It wasn't Jesus Christ. It was Jesus the Christ. I think people.
No, my dad said it was Jesus H Christ. What the H stood for, I have no idea. When he's like, Jesus H Christ. Right. Christ means Christos, Messiah.
Right.
But the Jewish idea of a Messiah is a human being it means anointed, who's anointed by God to lead the Jewish people to create a world peace and all very nice things. The Christian Messiah is the second person, ultimately becomes the second person of the Holy Trinity, and Jews don't know anything about that. So Christianity becomes over centuries quite tribalistic, in the sense that if you don't accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior or as your Christ, you're going to burn in hell for all eternity. So that I'm not interested in any of that. I'm interested in reclaiming the historical Jesus, and again, we don't know if he said any of these things,
right,
but whose teachings are quite profound, quite Jewish, though they are reformist and worthy of our attention as much as any other rabbinic sage from the first century.
So he was to think of it, he was part of an internal debate within Judaism at the time. And if these folks afterwards, the people who turned him into Christ, hadn't done that, he still probably would be part of the canon or part of the conversation.
Part of the conversation, I would think. If I'm assuming enough people knew about him. But Judaism is not interested in his death, and certainly not his resurrection,
right?
Because we don't believe in that. But Christianity is all about his death and resurrection. The power of the Christ in the Christian church comes from the resurrection, and you can't be resurrected if you're not crucified first. Right. So those things are not of interest to me and not of interest to Jews. But just to give an example of why I put him in there, first of all, he's the most famous Jew who ever lived. Okay. Mm-hmm. But he raises interesting issues. So, for example, when he says, love your neighbor as yourself, he then tells a story to challenge the notion of who's your neighbor. If you read Leviticus 19:18 in context, it's clear that they're saying, love your Jewish neighbor as yourself. Now, there are other passages that say you have to treat the stranger or the alien, resident alien, with respect, with love. Love the stranger is also, part of the tradition. But love your neighbor it's clearly in the context of your Jewish neighbor. And then Jesus says, well, who's your neighbor? And then he tells a story about the Good Samaritan. And his point is, your neighbor can be anyone who treats you with respect, especially if you're in time of struggle. So it's not just a Jew. Just because you're a Jew doesn't make you, your neighbor. It's more relational, more interactive, perhaps. That's how you define neighbor. You can accept that, you can reject that, but that's part of the ongoing Jewish debate. So if you read, and this is where I get a lot of my stuff, Amy Jill Levine, who's a wonderful Orthodox, she's Orthodox Jewish woman who is a New Testament scholar, who, along with a colleague whose name now escapes me, wrote the Jewish annotated New Testament, where you go through and you read all these New Testament stories with notes, and the notes say, look, this is what he's talking about in the context of Judaism, which was his context.
Right.
And then she has another book, again with the same guy, sorry, I can't remember his name, called I think it's called The Bible With and Without Jesus, where she takes Hebrew Bible texts and shows how Jews read them, and Jews read them in many different ways, and how Christians read them, and how it's not like one is right and one is wrong. It's because they're talking to two very different audiences with two very different agendas, and just to show how they, how the Bible is used in different settings. Both her books are all brilliant, I think, and those are just two of them. So, but anyway, that's why I wrote about him. I think he is important. I did say, probably more than one controversial thing, but I said that, Jesus dies on Shabbat evening, Erev Shabbos. So Friday night, that's why it's called Good Friday, right? So I suggest that synagogues put Jesus in their Yortzeit list. When they read the names of those who have died on this day in years past, they put Jesus in. And of course, that's very controversial.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how many people wrote you about that one.
Nobody wrote me about that one. The two people who read my books, but they're too busy to write. But it was a not tongue in cheek, but I knew what most people aren't going to do that. But the idea was, don't forget this guy. Don't let Christians take away, because I'm overstating this, I know, but Christianity is to a great degree cultural appropriation from Jews. Mm-hmm. So don't give up so easily. Don't give it up. If we're always yelling, oh, you're wearing a Mexican blouse, but you're not Mexican. How dare you wear that blouse? Here's an entire civilization that is built on Jewish stuff, and they don't recognize it. They don't honor it. On the contrary, the history of Jews and Christianity is one of oppression and ultimately murder. So it's not like they honor our cultural impact on Christianity. They just appropriate it and turn it into something completely different. Right. And I'm saying, no, don't do that. Don't give up so easily.
Yeah, but it's pretty hard, don't you think? Well, maybe you don't think, but right now the politics of it. I mean, there's the political idea of including Jesus in the Jewish conversation can really rile a lot of people, and then they'll go, "Oh, you're Jews for Jesus," and what tribe do you belong to? Are you being authentic? Are you being, are you just pandering? I mean, because yours is really an intellectual conversation.
Well, it is an intellectual conversation, and I do hear that once in a while, but I don't care. I mean, I think the point is valid, and I think it has two audiences. One are Jews, who I'm suggesting, because you're not Jews in Israel necessarily, but Jews in the United States, where you're living in a largely Christian environment, mm-hmm. and you hear, at least I do. I mean, I live in Tennessee; it's a very Christian state, and I'm quoted at all the time. Jesus is the suffering servant, Isaiah 53. What do you make of that? And then I think you have to know. You could say, I'm just a Jew. I don't know anything. Mm. But ignorance is not my first option. Mm. I think you need to know, what was the suffering servant? How did Jews understand it? And this is, Amy Jill's book on the Bible with and without Jesus. How did Jews understand Isaiah 53? what does it mean when Jesus says, you should be born again? Well, the Greek doesn't actually say born again. It says born from something higher. So he's saying, if you want to follow me, you're going to have to get beyond the mundane and go to a higher level of either consciousness or intellect or whatever it is. I don't know. But there's such depth. But first of all, we don't know Greek.
Right.
So it's all dumbed down to whatever English you read.
Right.
And second of all, most of us don't know the Jewish background. And so we miss the whole thing. And when we're confronted, why don't Jews follow Jesus? I don't know, because I'm Jewish, but that's not an answer.
Right. And so often too, we see the past through the lenses of those who've shaped the past, whether it's our rabbis or other cultures, who say, this is what it says. And so rather than reading it firsthand and understanding and exploring it, we depend upon them, or we're so influenced by them, we don't even really see what it says. I had a great experience when I traveled. I did an interfaith trip to Israel, and a friend of mine who's a minister, a Presbyterian minister, who was very much a Bible scholar, we were doing the Beatitudes, and he began to explain, many people know the Beatitudes, and he began to explain what they meant, not how they're understood, when they were written in context.
And
it really...
In Amy Jill's book, one of the parts of Matthew is, the meek shall inherit the blank.
Right.
And we always say in English, the meek shall inherit the earth, like the whole globe. But the Greek, because New Testament is a Greek text, is based on the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible made by Jews for Jews. The Greek says, inherit the land. So again, Jesus is talking about Israel, that, we don't conquer the land, Rome owns it. But if we take some other, and meek is the bad translation too, I think. But anyway, there's another way to be Jews in Israel, that we will inherit it and not the Romans. And lots of what he said is anti-Roman, but if you don't know the context, you have no idea. Somewhere over your shoulder on your bookshelf is a book by our sainted teacher, Ellis Rifkin, called What Crucified Jesus, as opposed to who. You Jews crucified, which is wrong. Romans did, but he talks about what, because if you understand the cultural, social, political norms of the time, saying what Jesus said, it was like, hey guys, Romans over here, crucify me because I am coming after you.
Right.
And the system crucified him. So it's studying Jesus is studying first century Jewish history, culture. And I think it's very important to do. The other thing I said real quick, that there were two audiences. One is Jews. The other is Christians. I speak at a lot of churches, and what they want to hear is the Jewish Jesus. They're really not, I don't go to fundamentalist churches, but the churches that invite me are, and you travel with Unitarian pastors and you do these interfaith trips. So it's the same kind of thing. They're fascinated by a deeper dive into their own sacred text from the point of view of the original audience and authors of that sacred text, namely Jews.
Right. Well, I think that's one of the great things you've done, not just in this book, but in a lot of books where you've done translation, is open up the text beyond the way it is typically interpreted or typically rendered into English, to open it up so people see that it's far more nuanced and far more complicated. And there was a cultural and context in which this was being written. It didn't explode de novo. It came out of a particular place, and beginning to look at that place, it's actually far more interesting. I have to say, I think it is the text. I like the text. My only fear, and I try to say this regularly, is it's not authoritative. It's just our text. There are lots of texts around the world that are interesting. This happens to be our text of a particular time, but it shouldn't define how we live our lives any longer. We can explore it and use it, but not be bound by it.
Yeah, Mordecai Kaplan said, I'm paraphrasing, but he was talking about tradition. But it should have a vote, but not a veto.
Right.
But you can see from all the stuff behind me, and there's more if I tip over here.
Right.
I've got the iconography of every religion I have studied and incorporate it into my work, Sanskrit texts and Pali texts. And, I'm interested in all of it. I think religion is a human invention. I think that the best of it gets us to a higher stage of consciousness that connects us with all human beings, but with the entirety of the planet. And you can learn from all of them, even if you have one that's your home text, your home base.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. I really appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate the work that you've done, the scholarship that you shared with all of us through your writing, and the scholarship that you've shared specifically with our community here, whether it's been online, you've taught here. I look forward to you doing that again. And thank you. And again, I encourage everyone, if you haven't had a chance, go look for any one of Rabbi Shapiro's many books, 36. If you can't find a book you like out of the 36 books, you have not looked hard enough.
Thank you. Rabbi Barr, my best friend.
Oh, all the best. You all take care, and we continue the service now.
I hope you can tell how much I enjoy being with Rabbi Shapiro, even though we do it over a distance and over Zoom. He has been a friend for a very long time. We met first in Israel when we were both students, beginning our training as rabbis, and we have remained friends ever since. You can see how dynamic he is, how thoughtful. His scholarship is wonderful. When I said find one of his books, I meant it. He's written so many books, translations, about 12-step, about different approaches to comparative religion. You can find something in his works that I'm sure will speak to you. He's a wonderful teacher, and I'm looking forward to him teaching again a Sunday morning adult education sometime in the spring. We will let you know when that's coming about. I hope you listened and enjoyed and learned from our conversation. And we continue the service. Let the Sabbath be a time for believing in what can be and seeing with new eyes. In the serious world, let us take ourselves less seriously. In these harsh times, let us listen for a soothing word. While the world around us unfolds in an instant, let us judge each other a little more slowly. Let the Sabbath shine a light into a corner of ourselves where hope's renewed. Let us remember a reason to be joyful, a way to be gentle. Let the Sabbath be a time for opening up. Let us find strength in our dreams and trust in our strength. And then if you have some wine or some juice, join with me. We celebrate the fruit of the vine and bounty of nature as we lift the cup. For we are part of nature, which gave us birth and continues to sustain us. Even as we depend upon nature, so do we influence its course. Through the search for understanding, we have gained the knowledge to shape our world. Guided by the best of human wisdom, the passion of our spirit, we accept the responsibility which rests upon us. May the taste of the wine and juice upon our lips stir within us a reverence for nature and a respect for human endeavor. Bruchim chachayim ba'olam. Blessed is the life within the world. Bruchim chachayim ba'adam. Blessed is the life within each person. And we say, l'chaim, to life. So I'm glad you were able to join us for this streaming Shabbat service. Again, I encourage you to go search out Rabbi Shapiro. Type in his name in Google, his website comes up, you'll find his books, and I hope you will pick one up and read one, or maybe read two or read 5. That's a great scholar, and you can learn a lot from him. So I'm pleased you joined us. You can go to bethadam.org. That's always the best way to find out about what's happening at the congregation, about adult education, which we typically have on Sunday mornings. You'll see what the topic is, who's speaking, as well as what services we're having, whether we're having a streaming service like we did tonight, or a hybrid service, which is over Zoom, and you need to have a link to do that. You can also listen to my commentaries. You can also learn more about the philosophy of the congregation by going to bethadam.org. Of course, the year is drawing to an end, and if you are able to financially support us by a donation, we would greatly appreciate that. Some of you already have. And thank you for your support. Your financial support, whatever you can give, is important. It allows us to continue the work and the experience that we're having. So please consider what you're able to do. Go to bethadam.org, and there you will find on our website a place to make a donation. Also, you might consider at this time, if you're making a donation to your local food bank or one of the areas, I'm sure in your area, has resources for folks who are homeless or in need. This is work we do here in greater Cincinnati and Loveland, particularly where we are. And I'm sure if you're outside of our region, there are issues as well. So please consider doing that. We all have a role in making our world better. I hope you join me again in the weeks to come. And we close with the words we close each week. May we know blessings, those who are near. May we know blessings, those who are far. May the Sabbath bring its goodness to everyone soon, wherever they are. May we know blessings today, and may we know blessings through the night. May health be for our children and for all people, and all things soon be right. May we know blessings in our comings. May we know blessings as we depart. May we live each day with peace and wisdom in each heart. Can ye heed? Let it be. Shabbat Shalom.